Thank you. Thank you for having me. My family and I are related to be able to help here at the London School of Economics, and opens up some doors and worlds for you that you might not others thought of. One of the things that I realized was when I was here in the 80s, I enjoyed it, but I did not hear the word entrepreneur until 1988. So somehow or another I missed it when I was here, and it probably changed my life if I had heard it a little earlier. And so that was kind of the idea behind sponsoring this program here for my family. The short version of my talk is get started, and now I'll give you the slightly longer version. So I didn't look up what the word entrepreneur meant, or a definition of entrepreneurship until yesterday, but there was this guy in the 1700s, Cantillon, I think, an Irish, French economist, and he said non-fixed income earners who pay known costs of production but earn uncertain incomes. I'm going to read more of this guy's work because that is spot on. It is just phenomenal. And then sort of you move forward to the 1970s, and this professor from Harvard, Stevenson, not a bad definition, the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. As long as you include risk and everything else can go wrong in resources, I actually like that one as well. So then sometimes I have to describe for people, like, what is entrepreneurship? And it means so many different things to people, but the example that I like, somebody wrote, and they said that it had the, every time you make an important decision, there's some existing choices, and you pick one and make it fit. An entrepreneur will think about it, think about the best, and implement that best. Not a bad way to think about it either. So I, sort of thoughts, high-level thought on entrepreneurship. I think it's critical commercially and socially. I don't think entrepreneurship really exists in government, large corporations, and large organizations. We'll get into that another day. And why do I think it's important? I think that there's problems that the government and large corporations can't solve, and for a whole bunch of reasons don't want to solve. And it's an opportunity for folks like you to solve them. So, in order to give you a little bit of context to my views, Al touched on my background, but I had a normal upbringing, very normal family life, upstate New York, but as a youth I showed zero indication of academic, entrepreneurial, or any other promise. After a curious route to college in the United States, I came to LSE, the recommendation of another professor, shocked that they gave me a scholarship to come here. And so by the time I arrived at LSE, I was a confirmed socialist on my way to being a communist, and I was just elated when I could study at the British Library and channel my inner Karl Marx. It was just in my own element. 6 months later, I was a capitalist, and I would have been a rare earth metal trader here in London, except for the firm that agreed to hire me went bankrupt 2 months before graduation. So I scrambled and got a law school to let me in without the LSAT, and decided that that was a place to go and hang out for safe haven for a while. Then I made partner at a big law firm, and about 3 months after that I realized I was miserable, and that was not going to be my calling. And so my wife, my one-year-old son, my wife was supportive of me. I quit and went and tried to find what I wanted to do next. In that interim period, my wife developed breast cancer, and she couldn't work in the corporate world anymore. So she bought her first company, took 30 grand, bought this little two-person company, and so she was off into the races. So I needed a job, I needed something to do. So I decided investment banking was my next calling. It's a great job. Many of you will take it. The reason you'll take it is because you got to pay student debts, I get it. Or your parents are sick of supporting you, so you just got to go get a real job. And so it's awesome. You'll think you're king of the hill, but you're not. You're just a highly paid intermediary. And so that was not fulfilling for me either. I was next hired by a telecom company, about a 400-person company, and they promoted me far beyond my skill level to CEO. Only to discover I'm horrible at operations, and I bankrupted the company after 6 months. So it's 1998, and I recognized that my wife was far happier than me running small companies. So I decided to jump into that world. I probably didn't have that many other choices, but I probably could have found something else to do. In any event, I had no clue what I was doing. It was everything from simple tasks to like how do you identify a good business plans, none of the stuff I knew anything about. I could do wickedly complex financial models, but at the end of the day, that's really not what it's about. Since then, my wife and I have started over 20 companies and invested in over 50 others, everything from services, medical device, patent licensing, software. There's really no limits on what we'll look at, invest in, or start. And if we think that somebody's, that either we figure it out, a better way to do it, or somebody comes to us who's figured out with a better way to do it, we're in. Only limitation is time and money, and sort of the key is trusted management. You can spend a ton of time doing due diligence. I recommend you spend time on what kind of person it is. Go out and eat dinner with them or whatever, because it's by far the most important asset when these companies are coming along, because that person is the one that's going to make money or make the project work or not. So, personal favorites where I've been involved. I have a predictive analytics company that I've owned for 7 years and shoveled a ton of money in, and I think it's about finally to turn itself around. It's relevant to big data, something we bought a number of years ago, thinking that that might be a trend as opposed to just collecting it. Somebody might want to eventually analyze it someday. And then socially, my favorite one is one that my son identified for us about 6 months ago, and it was 2 chefs. And what they do, they take at-risk kids, and that means a nice way of saying kids who are otherwise in prison. And they teach them about life by putting their work in restaurant and food service business. I just thought it was one of the most creative things that I'd ever heard, and was excited to support that one. So I struggled with a little bit about what to talk to you about tonight, so I thought maybe the most relevant thing was, what would I wish I'd known in 1998 that I know now? So I came up with a quick list. The first one is, and I was horrible at this, the entrepreneurial or big idea. I started out thinking that the idea had to be earth-shattering that you came up with. I was wrong. Simple example is footwear. It's been around forever, Sumerian times, maybe a little earlier, but significant innovation constantly showing up in this area, and that's one that kind of sticks in my mind for some reason. Incremental improvement is all that it takes. It's much more common to improve on existing product or service than it is to come up with something that's never been done before. You don't need to do it. And look at the history of Facebook. They weren't the first. So then, what is the best source of inspiration for these ideas? This is another one you'll struggle with. Like, how do they come to you? I hear about these aha moments. Not really how it works. So I think the best way to get to these ideas is walking around, talking to people, and just living. Best ideas we have found or seen involve making some day-to-day problem less of a problem. Hailing a cab, expensive private car services, Uber. This is an awesome idea. I am so bummed I missed that one. And it's just phenomenal if you think about it from that perspective. Make sure that when you're going through the analysis stage that you read and interact in a variety of areas. Avoid the temptation to focus on one area. You'll find that in industry and other areas that they will have solved problems that were unsolvable in the other one, and it's important that you don't miss up that on the evaluation stage. I'm big into multidisciplinary approach in the evaluation stage, but don't let it become groupthink or a committee decision. It's not how entrepreneurialism works, but again, in the analysis stage, important to do it. Test your ideas. This one's not going to be popular, but choose your partners carefully. I hope someone will study this in more depth, but my experience is that success in these types of endeavors is really more about singular focus than it is a shared vision. When there are no investors, no money in the bank, you can't make payroll, and you don't have money for food, that's not a shared experience. That's very unique to you, and you might want to keep that in mind. I want you to note, though, view with skepticism anybody who tells you they got there without anybody's help. Help and partnering, 2 very different things. You're going to need help. The other thing that I wish I had thought more about before I started was be prepared to change and refine your ideas. I hung on to some things just dogmatically that were awful. I thought they were the greatest thing in the world. They just weren't. Sort of a step down from that is, in the reality of execution, my wife and I call the reality of execution, you're going to find that you have to change your ideas. It's just refinement. It's awesome that you thought you were going to go left when, in fact, you have to go a little right first and then left. But knowing that you have a plan to reform, and a plan to modify is a good thing. Make sure on proving feasibility that you understand what bootstrapping is, and I think that you're going to find more and more that without proof of feasibility, that it's going to be really difficult to make money. So when you're putting your ideas together, you might want to think about how it is that you're going to get to the point where you can raise money. So the raising money point. Raising money is the worst. Actually, not raising it when you really need it is slightly worse, but it's still horrible. And I've seen more great ideas just get consumed by the mission to raise money. It just consumes these, CEOs. And so just think about that. It's going to take you much longer to raise money than you think it is. So when you're sort of in your planning stage, make sure that what you're thinking about is all right, how can I get this thing to feasibility so I can get Kleiner Perkins to put money into it. They're just not going to throw money at you because you went to the LSE. The other one is that when everybody thinks you're wrong. So I would reflect upon that. If everybody says your idea doesn't make sense, silly, not going to work, you definitely want to think about that. But at some point in time, you can't let the masses deter you. Particularly on the social and commercial side, there's a playbook. And people are put off by it, not put off like angry, but put off like don't understand it when you don't play by that playbook. So I've seen some of the ideas that y'all have brought to your professors on both the social and commercial side, and from what I've seen, those are some pretty good ideas. And it doesn't seem like you all are going to be as restricted as I was by the playbook, but just catch yourself and make sure you're not falling into that trap. And obviously, for people who tell you you're wrong, part of the reason your idea is a good one is because they don't get it, and you're going to go execute on it. So don't be bothered by it. Embrace it. One of the things I also wish I'd known was that there are a ton of resources available to you that you're not really thinking about, and you should use them. I know they talk about networking. I think that's a little bit overdone, to tell you the truth. But there are successful people in a particular area. And what I find, particularly once they sort of hit like my age, 50 or above, that they're willing to talk to you. They might even have coffee with you. I've even had people that I've needed help, and they've gone out to dinner, and they didn't know me from Adam. So tap into that. Worst thing they're going to do to you is say no, don't worry about it. And the reason you want to talk to them is that you want to make new mistakes. Okay, so it's don't repeat the ones that have already been made and can easily be avoided. And that sounds so obvious, but I wish somebody had told me that, because I should have talked to more people before I started a number of the companies that I started. And then sort of that's brother is know what you don't know. So particularly on simple tasks, the first time I had to set a bank wire, it took a week. I could have asked somebody, it would have been out the door in 5 minutes. So these little skill sets that you don't really value because you're not thinking about them, they're actually quite valuable. This one is just something you should be aware of, the reality versus the dream. You have no idea how hard it's really going to be. If you did, you'd never do it. It's much easier just to collect a paycheck 9 to 5 and enjoy the weekends and holidays. When you actually do this for a living, you're never really off. Work nights, work weekends, I don't think about it anymore. You're constantly under stress. Even when things are going great, that's stressful for a whole different set of reasons. So it becomes really consuming. And when you raise money, it doesn't get any better, because all they do is raise expectations and expect better execution, which makes a pressure-packed situation even worse. And so I hear many people say, enjoy the journey. The reality is the journey at times is brutal, and it is fun to look back and say, oh, that was awesome over time, but there will be periods when you're just out of money, people knocking at the door for rent, whatever it is, vendors, critical vendors, and it's not so awesome. So, if you look at it, your chances of success to just survive 3 years, I think is about 20%. Your chances of financial success is less than 5%. I saw some statistic today, it's 0.4%. And so the best description is sort of, moments elation surrounded by years of doubt and fear. But when it clicks, it's awesome. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I do all kinds of things, jump out of planes, whatever. And there's nothing like the feeling when this thing clicks. It's worth it. So I encourage you to do it, even though there's a few little risks that you're probably not thinking about right now. Particularly for students. Look, y'all got into LSE, and so chances are, as a young adult, you haven't experienced a whole lot of failure. And I want to assure you that getting a low grade in Calc 4 feels a lot different than having to lay off 10 employees that were loyal to you and followed you, and you just don't have the money to pay them anymore. It's like, ugh, worst feeling in the world. So if you thought about it, more reasons not to start than to start. Prudent, thoughtful assessment, of course, is appropriate. Knowing all the risks, you're not going to do it. Having answers to all the questions, you're not going to do it. Just get comfortable with that. And lastly, you can learn a lot from your failures. Success, my wife says, tends to remind me of how brilliant and good-looking I am. And so you have to be careful of that, particularly if you enjoy success in the early stages. And with failure, it allows you to make mistakes, new mistakes the next time, and brings you back to earth. So, final thought. Being a non-fixed income earner, frightening, motivating, and thrilling all at the same time. It's not for everyone, but my family and I are excited to be able to help promote the study and encourage the experience of entrepreneurship at one of the world's great universities. So for me, the most important part of entrepreneurship is getting started. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So we now have a little time for questions and answers. So questions for Eric. We have roving mics. So perhaps the gentleman above. If you could say your name and perhaps who you are before you ask.
David Stringlamar, Fortis Consulting, London, but also the chairman of the Institute of Directors, City of London. So first of all, I want to congratulate you on obviously putting this great venture together. Of course, the IOD, and particularly the City of London, is very focused on helping business succeed and obviously also helping entrepreneurs succeed. So I'm very grateful for Dr. Carol O'Connor for inviting me along, and no doubt she'll keep me abreast of all the things that you're going to do. My question, I was very interested, you spoke about organizational entrepreneurship and perhaps how it does not exist. And obviously a lot of effort and research goes into trying to make organizations, medium and large, actually have and create entrepreneurship. Could you explain that a little bit more, why it might not exist, and if it doesn't exist, how we can actually encourage it to exist? Thank you.
It doesn't exist. I work with a lot of big companies. I've not seen it at one of them. They say it, they'll say entrepreneurial spirit, they'll say entrepreneurial this, entrepreneurial that. We have a skunk works that doesn't have to report to management, blah, blah, blah. It's not true. So I just haven't seen it, so that's why I'm a bit skeptical of it. I hope that somebody studies it and so I guess one of the first problems is to bring some definition to it. And then after you bring definition to it, figure out. So you saw like HP split up today, and part of the justification was, a more entrepreneurial group. Well, good luck. You're still going to have 25,000 people at either one with 14 levels of management. It's just never going to be entrepreneurial, but there may be something that they can do that gets them closer to that. So if I look at one analogy, sort of special forces in the military, I think get pretty close. And it'd be interesting to sort of study that and think about that. Still report in, but it's getting really close. So again, from an academic perspective, I don't know. I just know from a real world perspective, I haven't seen it.
Maybe I can just add a few words to that. The idea of entrepreneurship is fairly new, but it is becoming increasingly important, I think. You've got large organizations, and you look at their performance versus local organizations in countries, and you find that small local organizations actually outcompete the large organizations, not because of resource reasons, obviously, but because they're simply less adept and less agile in terms of understanding what the market needs. And so you have now firms that I think are investing quite heavily into training and giving enough time to some of their employees to really sort of embed skills that have to do with, we're a large organization, we're relying on past successes, what's next. And in a sense, I think there's very little thinking around that and very little investments, but I think that investment is also growing. So the notion of, I think, entrepreneurship is growing alongside interest in entrepreneurship. And that's certainly something as a unit that we want to look at.
Yeah, and I'd be a strong advocate of investing on that side because they're just doing it wrong right now, but there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way to do it.
Yeah. We have a question over there.
One topic you didn't address, sorry, Guillaume Touchard, I'm an alumni, and I work for Orange in the UK. One topic you didn't address was the environment, regulatory, economic environment. I come from France, and obviously entrepreneurs in France, it's better to be an entrepreneur in the UK or in the US than an entrepreneur in France. Do you think it's critical when you want to start a business to choose the right place to start it?
Yeah. So my wife and I have tried in France twice. There will not be a number 3. And so, look, I think they're trying. The young finance minister who was there 3 years ago, I think it was, I spoke to him and just tried to explain what our view was as to why things weren't working. And he just said, the political realities of and the power of labor are such that we just couldn't do what you wanted to do. Having said that, look, if you look down in Grenoble, there's some pretty cool medical device stuff going on. Out closer on the outskirts of Paris, you have some interesting things going on in the pharma space out near Versailles. So they're trying. But my view is look, if it's easier to do it in the UK or the US, just do it there. And I'll tell you this too. So you don't have to fly to Palo Alto. Okay, so that's another thing that I hear from European entrepreneurs. The first thing they want to do is somehow get out to the West Coast of the United States. I think it's important to be connected there. You don't have to be there. That's a little like community cult of all its own. And they look at the world very differently. Go out there, connect with whoever you need. Don't recommend locating there either. But I do think that's a tough one. I mean, I love France. I like to spend time there, but it's just too hard to do business there.
Okay, we have a question over there.
Hello, my name is Carsten Sorensen. I'm one of the locals from Department of Management, but I also was part of an unsuccessful startup last year. So the question I have, which I think is interesting for us in academia, is how important was it for you, or has it been for you in your career, academic insight? So we were very close to getting investments, second round investments, and one of the investors says, yes, but I tend to stay away from academics in startups because that's too much theory and too little action. So it'll be interesting, I think, for me and for us to hear, because you have an academic background, and so is it just getting started and don't care about, we all hear Lord Sugar in this country who is very proud of not having any academic credentials. So there seems to almost be a divide where entrepreneurship is seen as, well, I'm not academic, so I can be an entrepreneur. So I would like your comments on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So look, for a populist story, there's nothing more I like to hear than somebody who graduated from 8th grade who made $1 billion. I think that's awesome. But I do think that there's a role, and we wouldn't have invested in this if we didn't believe that. We absolutely think there's a role for academics, both in the sense that it would be interesting to see if people can start to say, what really makes these things successful? There just doesn't appear to be any pattern to me, and I can't figure it out. Then your direct question of academics in business. Yeah, you have to be a little bit different because they're not, they sometimes worry about things that they shouldn't worry about, and they're very uncomfortable once they get out of whatever their PhD thesis topic is. But the predictive analytics company I told you about is run by a professor and 2 PhDs at the University of Minnesota. When you have a group like that, you keep a really flat organization with just one directive, and you can't constantly be changing directives because they don't get it. But as long as you have a relatively fixed mission and product plan, I actually happen to like investing in academics. The number one attribute I look for is smart. Agile is the second one. So I don't think there's, I can see a VC saying that, but whether or not they really believe it or not, it's a different question.
I should mention that we had a speaker, Peter Thiel, recently, who talked about his fellowships, and his fellowships are in fact sort of intended to get people out of university and into entrepreneurship and paying them for doing that. So it's a scholarship to basically get a better entrepreneurial education outside universities. Okay, yeah, we have a lady, just a lady there.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shiva Tambishetty from the Law Department. I teach and write on patent law. So you forgive me if I was a little disappointed that you didn't speak a lot about IPNAV, which I was hoping you would. I'd like to know from you what you would say to your critics who dislike the fact that you've made an extraordinary success of a particular kind of dysfunction in the law. And through that response, whether you would care to say something about any sort of civic responsibility that is associated with successful entrepreneurship.
So when you use words like dysfunction to describe
Well, I mean,
something, you sort of prejudge the issue, but I'm comfortable
Yeah,
with
no,
that.
I understand, but I think there are a lot of critics who would say lots of patents that were enforced by your company should not have been granted in the first place, or that the enforcement takes advantage of uncertain boundaries in the law about what is valid and what's not valid. And I think that's a very pertinent question, certainly for the US system, but also to some extent for the UK, where we have less of an issue with the winner wins legal fees issue in the court system. But I think it's something that we need to be increasingly aware of in the UK. So I'd just like to know what you...
Yeah, so with the UPC coming, you should be increasingly aware of it, because
I
it's
think we
going to
should all be
change.
scared with the UPC, but no, I mean with the change in legal fees, I think patent trolling, again, it's not a particularly nice term, but I think patent trolling is going to become a bigger problem in the UK. But I think I'm really interested to hear about your ideas and thoughts on civic responsibility, if any, that goes with successful entrepreneurship.
So I don't equate patent licensing and civic responsibility at all. So look, and I don't want to bore the rest of the crowd. A patent's a right to exclude, okay? It's plain and simple. And you can talk about invalid. We've had one invalidated, okay, out of 6,000. I think you should probably read some of Mark Shankerman's work, who's here. Probably, in my view, the best scholar in the space. He doesn't have an agenda, calls it down the middle, and I think that, he eloquently states the case, both sides of it, and you can be on either side of it, in an article that he's going to have published, I think, in January.
Thank you. Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Bassem Al-Ahmadi. I co-founded a startup last year while I was studying at the LSE called Global Risk Insights. I was just wondering, while I was studying at the LSE, there's this kind of conventional wisdom, not amongst the students, but just generally, that you would need to sort of gain a couple years experience at a big firm for 3, 4, 5 years, be part of that sort of, get that experience, get career development, and then you'll have the experience to then start up something. Obviously, I went against that, but I don't know what you think of that conventional wisdom. I just wanted to get your insight on that.
Look, I understand the reality is that some of you with massive student debt have to go to a little more certain environment than a startup because you're going to pay it back. So put that aside. Put this, or you've been living off your parents and you got to pay them back. So you have to take a more stable position with Goldman or whatever. But good from a contacts perspective, to the extent you need it. Interesting to see how they operate. One of the things I do is that if I can't make a decision, then I write down and I'm like, what would one of my big former employers do? And then I do something else. So I think that has value. But I think that's what's cool about this program, and what's dawned on me is that since I don't know what makes entrepreneurs successful, I don't think you need that 2 years at Goldman or 2 years at whatever hedge fund, and it's not horrible to do it to make sure that that's not what you want out of life. And it's a lot easier to go from Goldman to entrepreneur than it is from entrepreneur to Goldman, which may be impossible. So you just want to think about whether or not you're foreclosing possibilities. But in general, I don't think there's anything uniquely, I don't think there's anything significant that forces you to go into big business and then jump out. But it's a pretty common practice, and I think what happens to most of the people, many of the people, is they just realize how miserable they are, and they can't take it, they don't know what it is, and then that's the path they follow. But lucky you for jumping into business first. That's awesome.
Thank you. We'll take one more question. That lady in
Hi, my name's Mary. I guess I am no longer an LSE student. I just finished. I'm heading back to Kansas City to start a startup with my best friend, and the reason that we chose not to do it in London is because it's too hard for visa reasons. But I have a question about funding and when to walk away from funding. So we're just getting started, and hopefully we'll have lots of people wanting to fund us very soon. But when do you, when is it too soon to accept funding, and when do you say no to funding?
Okay, just real quick, what business?
Well, it's a
Like high level?
yeah,
like
yeah, fashion
Service?
e-commerce.
E-commerce, okay.
Yeah.
Tough space. The general thing that I find is that, and it's not directed towards them personally, it's just sort of their mentality, is that VCs will talk to you for months on end, and 6 or 7 months into the process, they'll reject it for a reason they had given you an hour after they met you. So I tend to do it a little bit differently, to the extent that the reason my wife's not here tonight, one of her companies is doing its first, she never took outside money, she just wanted to always be in control, but this is a little bit too big, and so she's actually doing it. And the way we ran the process is that sort of the classic two-pager, if you're interested, let us know, and give them incremental additional information, but you have to tease them into the process. If you just throw everything at them, it's too much. So that rapport that you'll develop with them, and relatively early on whether or not this is the type of a group you want investing with you, and obviously if you get Kleiner Perkins to throw money at you, that's awesome, take that under any terms. But I think that even in the United States, more classic sort of bootstrap, friends, family, and because what I don't want to do is if I really believe in my idea, I'm going to hit an inflection point at some point with not using a whole lot of money, and so if I really believe in it, why would I get myself diluted now? So I encourage you to sort of look at your business model, figure out where those inflection points are, and take in investment either shortly after, depending on your perspective, or well before. So when you hit those inflection points and you do your next round, you're not going to be diluted down to nothing. There's nothing worse than having a great idea, and this has happened to me, where I ended up, I'd rather own 10% of $1 billion company than 100% of $1 million company. That's a no-brainer, but ended up with about 3% of a company that turned out to be pretty valuable, but I just overfinanced it, and so it's a classic mistake people make. Hope that helped. I know it's a tough question.
Thank you, Eric. A very quick one? Okay.
Hi, I'm a MSc student, just finished. I had a question for you. You are a very great, unique combination of entrepreneurship, but also helping people. I like supporting now a startup, which is also an ONG, helping to buy coffee directly from the farmers in Colombia. But then my question is, do you think it's possible to be a successful entrepreneur, but at the same time helping people? Because I find my project very interesting because we are paying better price to the farmers and cutting taxes for them and all the export thing, but at the same time I'm seeing we're not making money.
Yeah, look, if that's what drives you, then absolutely, of course you can. I mean, there's no, it's weird, there's no distinction, not distinction is the wrong word, but you can be a capitalist and want to do good as well. If helping farmers, aggregate and get better rates when they're dealing with the Starbucks of the world is what floats your boat, I think that's awesome. And somebody else had one where they were doing, they were going to help the local merchants buy in bulk in some country in Africa. I don't remember what. One of you floated this idea around. So as I read through those, I was like, this is really good. Somebody else had stickers that they were going to put on the back of bus seats, I think in Ethiopia or whatever, that encourage people to call to get better health care. And somehow they figured out they were going to make money with that. I think those ideas are phenomenal. And again, if that's what motivates you, absolutely go for it. And it's absolutely achievable.
Okay, thank you very much. Eric, do join me in thanking Eric.